Welcome to the Mid-America PTTC podcast, where we are a community of change leaders and prevention catalysts that strive to empower individuals and communities to promote safe, healthy, and drug-free communities across our region. We're honored to have you as a member of our PTTC community. Thanks for listening and keep up the great work.
Every single one of us is a leader and could be a leader.
It started with a local coalition in our county.
Strategies you know, but stories you don't.
Data is the currency of prevention.
We want to reduce the negative and we want to promote the positive.
Collaboration is the only way to move the prevention needle.
About connecting the research with the practitioner.
Put something out there that was kind of off the wall and create a community of prevention.
It's a passion, it's a real love to try to help make our world a little bit better, a little bit happier, small pieces at a time.
It's said an overnight success takes 16 years.
If we didn't plan for the change, but if we didn't help orchestrate it, then change is going to be upon us.
When it comes to the spiff, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Because the real power is in the process.
Ultimately, all of us want success in the work we're doing. We don't want to do mindless work. Proactive, participatory planning promotes positive, preventive progress.
This is the Mid-America PTTC podcast. I'm your host, Dave Clausen, and I am the director of the Mid-America Prevention Technology Transfer Center. Our guest is Officer Ryan Snow. Ryan serves full-time as a police officer with a large university police department where he educates the community about DUI and drug-related issues. He is a certified drug recognition expert instructor and has completed hundreds of hours of training related to drugs and the impacts they have on the human body. As a police officer, Ryan has firsthand knowledge of the dangers that drugs bring to communities. He has spoken at numerous national and state conferences on topics related to drugs, and he has also developed training opportunities for campuses and delivered those classes at colleges and universities across the nation. Ryan's work has been featured in webinars, newspapers, television, and educational articles. And prior to law enforcement, Ryan graduated with a bachelor's degree in education and a master's degree in educational administration. Now, before we get into the content, we'd like to thank our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. And a quick note, although funded by SAMHSA, the contents of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. Without further ado, let's get into the content. All right, I'd like to welcome Ryan Snow to the podcast. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
During my introduction, I mentioned that you are a drug recognition expert, or DRE. Would you mind sharing what all that entails?
Yeah, sure. Back in 2013, I put in a request to go to the drug recognition expert school or training. I was extremely lucky to be granted that opportunity. I went out to classroom training, a 2-week period of time, and then moved from that and did some evaluations on individuals that were actually under the influence of some type of drug. And the training basically trains you to be able to identify different signs and symptoms within somebody that's ingested a drug and be able to identify what type of drug that they've ingested or what category of drug they've ingested. So I may not be able to tell you that somebody has been doing cocaine, but I would be able to identify that they were under some type of a stimulant. And I kind of have come up with my own way of referring to the DRE school as kind of the PhD of training when it comes to impaired driving, because when officers are hired during the academy, they'll attend the 24-hour NHTSA training, so the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration training. It's a 24-hour program that we teach all officers in the academy to help them identify when somebody is too impaired to be driving. But most of that focuses on alcohol, and when they get out, they have the opportunity to take a class called A-Ride, which is the Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement class. And that's a 16-hour class, 2-day class, to give them a better idea of identifying people that are impaired based not only on alcohol, but also drugs as well. And so it's kind of a crash course for identifying when somebody may be under the influence of some type of a drug and how to kind of go about that process. I kind of refer to that. So the 24-hour class would be like your bachelor's degree of impaired driving. The A-Ride class would kind of be like your master's degree of impaired driving. And then the DRE school is basically the PhD, where we really break down all the different drugs, signs and symptoms, how they impact the body, and things like that, so we can give officers a really good idea of how to process if they come across somebody that's impaired by, a type of drug.
Wonderful, wonderful. And really, on top of that PhD, you're also a DRE instructor. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so a couple years back, actually, I was approached by the DRE coordinator and asked if I wanted to take part in the instructor program, and I absolutely accepted that opportunity. And so now I'm one of the instructors that will actually teach the new DREs as they sign up to go through the course. I will travel to wherever the course is and teach some blocks or segments on the different drugs and how they impact the human body and what kind of changes you'll see and that type of thing. And I also will assist them as they go through their process where they have to do evaluations on individuals that are actually under the influence of some type of a drug, and I'll stand there and kind of help them through that process. These are their first kind of introduction to doing the evaluation on an actual person, and so I'm there to kind of coach them along to that process and come up with the correct decision based on what they're seeing.
A wealth of knowledge and experience. Can't wait to dive into our episodes and learn more about some of the current drug trends. All right. Well, Ryan, I was hoping we could talk about promethazine on today's episode. Let's just start out with, giving us a little information about, what is it?
So promethazine is a prescription strength cough medicine that's normally prescribed in a combination of codeine. So you'll see the promethazine with codeine in it, and it is mainly prescribed to take care of severe coughs that might actually have some type of a pain component to it, which is why you get the codeine with it. And it's commonly known on the street in a couple different names. So you have lean, scissorp, purple drink, things like that. It's kind of become popularized for those reasons. And you'll see it in a couple different ways, and people will combine it with either 7-Up or Sprite. They'll add flavoring to it. So you'll see Skittles, Jolly Ranchers, that type of stuff, also dissolving in the the bottom of the cups, or however they're generally mixing it and drinking it. But it can be extremely dangerous drug because it does fall into the narcotic analgesic category, which contains other drugs like heroin, hydrocodone, the other pain type pills or pain relieving pills. That's where this falls into.
Okay. Now, we had talked about DXM on another episode. How would you compare or contrast these two?
So they're definitely not the same. Some people get them mixed up just based on the idea that it's a medicine that you're drinking and it provides a high, effect. With promethazine, with the codeine, you see much, much more of a downside effect. So the pulse rate, the blood pressure, the body temperature, things like that are affected down. And so you'll see somebody, maybe on the nod or seem like they're falling asleep on this type of a drug. When you have DXM, that's something where everything goes up. And so it's almost
an opposite or a completely opposite effect here when we're talking about the different results that we're seeing from the body when the drug is taken into effect.
Okay, perfect. Because I've heard several folks kind of get those confused, so that really does help. What about sort of the popularity of the promethazine?
Yeah, so the popularity increased a lot. You'll hear people in music, mainly rappers, but there's other genres of music that also incorporate this idea of lean or scissor, or that it's all referring to the promethazine with codeine syrup. And so when major artists put these types of drugs within their songs, anybody that is listening to the song or enjoys that style of music, they're hearing it, and it's like almost a subtle message that this is cool, this is a thing to do, this is what we do, and we're successful, and we do this. And I've heard many people actually refer to this and say that they do ingest promethazine with codeine syrup as a way of kind of relaxing them and giving them the freedom to come up with new and better music. And so they get that a lot from the major artists. And a couple of the major artists that have really popularized the promethazine and codeine, number one would be Lil Wayne. And Lil Wayne became extremely popular for promethazine. And there's some people that actually track back the idea or the use of a double cup back to Lil Wayne. And the double cup is just two styrofoam cups stacked. And there's different methods of thought on this. Number one, they think it became popular just because Lil Wayne did it. Another method of thought is the drug, when you're ingesting promethazine and codeine, it does not taste good. I mean, it is a medicine, and so it's a very strong cough medicine, and that does not taste very good. And so that's why you get the mixture of the different sodas, as well as some of the flavoring aspects with Skittles or Jolly Ranchers, something to dissolve to try to get that flavor better. But another idea is if you keep it as cold as you can possibly keep it, it will make it taste better as you're ingesting it. And so what they'll do is they'll take two styrofoam cups and make it a double cup. So place one styrofoam cup inside the other, which basically creates like a super insulated layer to have ice and then the liquid poured over the top of it. And because it's super insulated like that, it doesn't melt the ice as much. It keeps it colder for longer, so you can sip on it, which is another kind of popularized thing. Sipping on some scissor, was a song back in the day, and that refers to this drug. And it's not something that you can chug or drink at a fast pace. You really need to just kind of sip on it, because if you don't, it can take effect in a negative way on your body. And you can go into an overdose on this just like you would any other narcotic analgesic, where, you actually, the systems of your body are depressed so much that they just stop working, and you can actually go into an overdose and die on this. And it's an overdose on a narcotic analgesic, like I said, much like a overdose on heroin or fentanyl would be.
Serious dangers with it. That's interesting about the double cup. I had actually never heard that.
Yeah, this is actually kind of going back, I guess, a little bit too. It was also popularized. Justin Bieber got really heavy into promethazine syrup, and we actually saw in real time his career kind of decline based on his use of drugs and things like that. And that's something that he's admitted to later on, that, he had an issue with this, and he had to go through a process to try to rid his body of taking in this drug and get him back on track. And, he seems like he's doing a little bit better, at least now. And it seems like that aspect. But when you have somebody as popular as Lil Wayne, and, in some circles, obviously Lil Wayne is a very popular rapper and musician. And then you have Justin Bieber, who obviously reaches a much further reach of fans and people that enjoy his music as well. when people like that stand up and, say that this is what they're doing and this is why they're doing it and it's great and it's fun, it may actually spur people that have never tried the drug to try to get into it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you talked about, like I said, the double cup and keeping it cold. What are some methods or tools for use?
I mean, really, I guess I could just rehash some of them. Like we talked about the double cup. So that's probably the number one sign that I see. Anytime I see that double cup, I immediately go to Promethazine and try to figure it out. It comes in generally a couple different colors. It's either like a bright neon green or a purple kind of a drink, and that's where the nickname purple drink came from. But you'll also see candy, like hard candy, to go along with it to add that flavoring to make sure that when people are consuming the drug, it's not a bad taste for them. Something else I've picked up on that was popularized again by music is like a baby bottle or something that almost limits or inhibits you from drinking something extremely fast. So like a sippy cup or a baby bottle, they'll put the mixture in there and then drink it out of there because it literally controls how much is coming into their body all at the same time. And it's much harder to drink a large amount of that really fast. And so that would be another thing that I would probably look for when it comes to this. Oftentimes the prescription labels are torn off of the bottle, and the bottle is usually like a dark amber colored tint to it. I'm assuming to help protect the medicine that's inside from like the light, and sunlight may affect the medicine inside. But you'll see those bottles oftentimes with the label torn off because, like I said, it is a prescription drug. And so they don't, if you get it illegally, you wouldn't necessarily want it to be able to be traced back to the person you got it from. So they'll tear off the labels to help prevent that.
Okay, interesting. You talked about its effects on the body. What would be some things folks could see to tell if somebody has consumed?
So because it falls in the narcotic analgesic category of drugs, we get many of the same signs and symptoms that you would typically expect from any other narcotic analgesic. And once again, some of those drugs include like hydrocodone, heroin, fentanyl, anything, an opiate style drug. And so the constricted pupils, I would say, would be one of the biggest and easiest signs to pick up on. There are very few categories that cause constricted pupils. Narcotic analgesic is really the one that we teach. Stimulants can cause constricted pupils if they're on the downside of the effect of the drug, but that's a lot different, and that's like a whole nother rabbit hole I won't get into today. But narcotic analgesic would be like the one category that we talk about causing constricted pupils. We want to, that's something that you'll look for. So if the pupil or the dark colored of the eye is very small compared to the other people in the room, that's definitely a sign that they're under some type of a narcotic analgesic. You have depressed reflexes and drowsiness. So if somebody seems really drowsy, now we also talk about on the nod, and something interesting about on the nod is if somebody is on the nod, meaning they're essentially like falling asleep in front of you. It's very interesting when you do see it. One of the things that we teach and we talk about is people that are on the nod are still able to understand and comprehend the things that are going on around them, even when they're experiencing the idea that they're on the nod. And so if someone's on the nod in front of you, you definitely don't want to be talking about them or saying something about them or the drug, because they may come out of that, feeling or, experience of being on the nod and actually be able to repeat to you what you just said. Even though you felt like they were sleeping, that's not exactly how it works within the body. So, but being on the nod is one thing that we would look for Nausea will go along with this, and especially like a slow, raspy speech you'll get because the body is depressed, and so you'll start seeing that slow, exaggerated speech. That's something you would want to be looking for. And then, of course, like any kind of slowed breathing or anything like that, because like I said, this can definitely have an effect on you to the point of overdosing and death.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, is this something you are seeing used sort of in isolation by itself, or I think you actually refer to it as polysubstance use?
Yeah, this is something we see with polydrug or polycategory drug use here. Most of the time it's combined with either an alcohol or a cannabis or something like that. But that's also a very common thing is, when we're talking about drugs and if they're used in conjunction with other drugs, alcohol is by far and away the number one drug to be used with other drugs. Cannabis is obviously number two. And so when we talk about polydrug use with any drug really, but promethazine being, a drug that we're talking about now, I can say alcohol and cannabis, and it really shouldn't be a big shock to anybody, especially when we're talking about some of the areas in which it's popular, which is like the music scene. And in music, we have a lot of cannabis use and alcohol use as well. And so you tie those couple things together. And that's also when it becomes more dangerous because, alcohol serves as a depressant. So it's going to lower your pulse rate. It's going to lower your blood pressure and things like that. And so if you also are using promethazine with codeine in it and you have the additive effect of I talked about it in previous podcasts, but the 1 + 1 = 5, when you're having this additive effect, you can take somebody and with the promethazine and codeine and it's going to lower their pulse rate. But then you introduce the alcohol on top of that and it's going to really drop their pulse rate into a dangerous level. And so when you're adding a depressant and a narcotic analgesic together, you really, really have a cocktail of really dangerous drugs together.
So this has been very, very informative. Really helped clarify the difference between DXM and promethazine and how they are kind of, like you had said, opposite, and the potential dangers and impacts, overdosing on it. That's something I don't think folks really talk about, that potential, especially like you had said with polysubstances as well. I think that really wraps up the bulk of my questions for this episode. I'll put a few links to some resources in the show notes for this one. Thanks again for coming on and letting us pick your brain.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thank you.